Now I'm going to talk about the front end. So that's in this folder here. And it's basically there's an HTML file, and because I'm using Parcel to pack it, so Parcel packs it into this dist folder here. Earlier it was packing it, and you see it's actually very compact. This is the entire HTML. It's very compact. Parcel was putting it into two separate files, an HTML and a JS, and so the way around that is you actually have to inline some of it. So you kind of do this type equals module. You start it off by importing the script inside the script itself. Whereas before I had it like this, and then I actually had the script, and then everything just happened inside the script itself. But what you got to do is you got to open up the tag and actually import things into the HTML itself. That way, Parcel inlines it for you. Hopefully that made sense. Then here's some like trait generation code. So I think this was used. This didn't end up getting used. So this was basically trait generation that I was using locally to kind of ensure that the traits were coming out nicely. But once I actually shipped the code, I didn't end up including any of this because it's all on chain. So this whole section was essentially transferred to the contract. Same with some of this stuff. Yeah, this stuff here is included because it needs to fetch the colors for the different ors and things. And then what's happening here is the 3D rendering code. So render TS does a lot of heavy lifting. Basically combines the trait attributes and generates the shaders and things like that. All these comments they get taken out when I pack it. So all of this you see here, everything here, it gets compressed into this, which is quite tiny. Another interesting trick that I used. So there's actually a bunch of stuff here. I'll go from the top. So this GL here, this is a very, very, very lightweight implementation to get a full screen quad so that you can do ray tracing using GLSL in WebGL. Whereas earlier I was using 3JS, and 3JS was about 500 kilobytes when it was compressed, like minified, which is like totally unacceptable. So I had to take out 3JS, bring in this very basic low-level WebGL code and use that instead, and that saved me like, oh man, yeah, that saved me pretty much 500 kilobytes of data, which is very important because you don't want to be uploading 3JS on chain. You'd rather have this lightweight, low-level WebGL framework instead. So that was kind of a big job. I had to refactor quite a bit there. Another interesting trick is this GLSol minify. So this is basically this is a tool that lets you, and this is not actually part of the source code. This was just something that I used to minify, and then I commented it out, so it wasn't actually used anywhere. So this is a tool that takes GLSL code and minifies it, which is quite interesting. You don't normally see that, and I'll show you guys the difference. So I think I have a shaders folder here. So this is the fragment shader, the non-minified version, and then the minified version is here. Let me word wrap it. Yeah, so this becomes that. It's a pretty big difference. I think that saves a decent amount of space as well. This becomes that. Yeah. I had all kinds of different shaders in here. And this is the placeholder one minified as well. Okay, so going down to Noisemaker. This is a piece of code that I used that basically generates Perlin noise textures for you. And it's important for two things. The first thing is there's a Perlin noise texture that deforms the body of your clay. So when you guys look at the clay and there's like ripples and things on it, like veins and ripples, It's all coming from this Perlin noise texture, and the texture is used as a lookup to deform the geometry. Yeah, this is the render, so basically it just glues everything together. Not much here. This is somewhat interesting. This is a place where I'm setting different parameters for the different texture types, or the different trait types, to produce a nice looking Perlin texture that resembles the thing that I'm trying to convey. So you know, you have like colors for clay and metal and all that. Now, what I had earlier was I had actual textures, and they were like you know, JPEGs, and they were like 20, 30 kilobytes each. And that's insane. That's like way too much data. So I ended up scrapping all the textures and recreating them procedurally. And I basically had the texture open on one side, and I was tweaking all the little values here for each one until they looked somewhat similar, or like resembled the texture that I was trying to replicate, but procedurally. Ooh, okay, this video is getting long. um, Finally, I'm gonna just briefly go over the shader. So basically, the shader is inspired by this guy here, Nico Quellis. Um, he is not a big NFT fan, actually. So a lot of his shaders, you'll see, they'll say like, "Don't create NFTs," blah blah. But I'm very careful with licensing. So you can see, I was inspired by a bunch of his sign distance functions. I think there's something in my Twitter thread about it, but I might make a longer, more detailed Twitter thread specifically about sign distance fields. And it's a style of rendering that you basically shoot a ray, and then from that point in 3D space, you calculate the distance to everything around you, and then based on the closest distance to an object, you move that ray forward by about half that distance, and then you do it again and again and again, until you kind of reach an epsilon, like a very close distance to that surface, and then you sample that surface for its color, and then you bounce back to the eye, or whatever, like you take that color and that becomes a thing. And so basically took inspiration from a bunch of his shaders. I made sure to only use MIT licensed ones for certain functions. Like, I mean, some of them are very straightforward. Like, how do you calculate the distance to a sphere? It's literally just the length. So yeah, but there's some interesting ones here, like ellipsoid. I don't think I could figure this out on my own. But yeah, this was all open source, MIT license. So Nico, I love you, man. Yeah, don't get mad at me for making NFTs. Okay. Anyway, uh, so there's some interesting stuff here. This noise function, you can see I actually, maybe I deleted it, but you might see in some of the older ones, maybe this one. No, okay, I would have to revert the code probably. Yeah, you'd seen some of the older ones. There was like a noise function that actually used a bunch of math to generate the noise. But I found the performance on that really bad, and I really wanted this to perform well enough that it could run on most people's computers and also smartphones, etc. So that's when I kind of brought in the noisemaker, and this is using a texture instead to look up the noise. And then yeah, this is quite a bit to cover. I'll go over it really briefly. The map function is basically where you kind of design your object. And here is like, you could see the face is made up of two ellipsoids. Then there's a smooth union of the two ellipsoids together. Then the bottom of the face is another ellipsoid. The eyes are made out of spheres. Everything is kind of combined together there. The eyes are subtracted from the face. Then you also have, depending on whether we're looking at the top half or the bottom half, then the shoulders would also show up. So the shoulders are made of another ellipsoid, and then there's a plane. A plane is basically like a flat surface in 3D space, and then that cuts it. it cuts the ellipsoid in half so it resembles a shoulder shape. So basically the head and shoulders, you know, they get put together. And yeah, so it reminds me of the head and shoulders pattern when you're trading. Um, okay, so there's also the noise. So you see here, I end up adding noise to the distance based on the texture, and that kind of gives the clay its deformity. That's why they're not all like perfectly uniform spheres and ellipsoids. It's the noise here that gives clay its unique structure. And one thing I forgot to cover in the contract, actually, now that I mention it, you'll see in the trait generation, let's see, render attributes. I do render the 6 attributes at the top, but another important part is this seed here, and this seed is not related to rarity. This seed is to make sure that every clay looks unique. So no matter how much overlap there is with the existing traits, this seed, there's so many different combinations that it's pretty much impossible for two clays to look unique, and that kind of affects certain attributes like the head cut and the shoulders cut. So if you go down to here, you'll actually see I have this I had W constant, which gets, this is actually calculated from the seed here. So based on the, what is it? Yeah, based on the seed here, there's a random function that's initialized with that seed, and this will determine basically everything. And it's a consistent random function. It's a PRNG. So provided the same seed, it will determine different things like the width of the head and the tilt and the so the tilt is like where the clay gets cut off at the top or the bottom. That's all passed into the shader here as constants, and then using math, we kind of take a plane and we put an angle on those planes, and we cut it off at different angles. So it does end up generating a lot of variety. So no matter how many other traits are overlapping, the individual clays always look different. Then we also calculate things like soft shadows, normals. It's all pretty straightforward stuff if you're doing SDF, although SDF itself is just not straightforward. There's a reflection texture for like shiny things. I might in the future decide to update this so it shoots out a ray instead, which will be a lot more realistic. Ray traced reflections, if you guys are familiar with that from like video games and stuff. But I'll have to see how that impacts performance. But for now, I'm using an environment texture. And then there's also anti-aliasing. So all the clays are anti-aliased, like 2x anti-aliasing, basically, so you don't get aliasing. Yeah, I mean, I could go into more detail here, but there's probably no point. This is all just, you know, you ray trace and you load some textures and you mix colors together. And there's some light settings here. Yeah, but that's about it. So yeah, about the lights actually, real quick. Yeah, so there's actually 2 lights. So if you look at your clay, you'll see 2 shadows on the floor. That's because there's one light pointing from the left side, and then there's another light pointing from the right side. Originally I had 1 light, but I thought it looked nicer with 2 lights, like a studio setup. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, so that covers it. So basically I went over the contract tests, basically all the JavaScript code, and the shader. Hopefully that, and the HTML as well. So hopefully that gives you a really good idea of what technology is involved with the clay, how the contract was written, how the art was produced, everything. Yeah, so this was Kai, and thanks for joining me today.